Okay. Should we go ahead and get started then?
Yeah, sounds good. We have a lot to cover today, and it's a really interesting topic. First things first, we have 4 people here today who are going to be doing the bulk of this presentation, and I will do a very brief introduction of all 4 of us, even though all 4 of us are going to share this equally, but that eliminates the need to say it again when we start talking, say our names again. So you'll notice that Melanie Gylling, who's a colleague of mine with Smartbox, and Alicia Alverson, who's a colleague of mine with Smartbox, are here with me. My name is Chris Gibbons, and we are honored to have someone presenting with us today, Ashley Mohesky, who, as you'll learn, has tremendous experience and very relevant comments to offer on this topic. So I'm Ashley, I'm going to let you kind of introduce yourself as we get to that point, but hopefully you'll have a good feel for where all of us come from by the end of this as we talk our way through this topic. So here's what we're going to do. And I don't know, Melanie, are you sharing your screen yet so that people can see
not, but I will
kind of where we're going today?
There we go.
Great. So briefly, what we're going to cover in the next 50 odd minutes or so is a topic that includes kind of an overview of what is AAC as it relates to mental health. And I think this is a really specific topic on the one hand, but it is a very specific topic that all of us are very invested in, meaning AAC, dealing with a topic that all people need to manage. And it's maybe an area that we feel like we've not given enough attention as a field for the last 4 or 5 decades, since AAC has really been something we've been able to talk about coherently. We have a series of questions that are derived from our experience in the literature that will guide our discussion. And it's at a point, there's going to be these 5 basic questions. I don't think they're basic at all, actually, but they should stimulate a lot of active discussion. We're gonna lead that discussion, but we welcome you to join in at any point in the chat with questions and ideas. We're going to talk about some of the mental health supports that currently exist in GRID, and then what's missing and what the next steps are. So again, welcome to all of you who are here, and welcome to this topic. So if you can go ahead and just get on the next slide here, AAC and mental health. I want to start us off, that I'm going to hand the baton over to Melanie here in just a minute. But in thinking about what is it that governs our mental health as a human, I was trying to boil down into a few key points what those major influences are. First of all, obviously, we're born with genetic predispositions and brain organization. We have, I mean, it's no mystery that when you look at family histories and you say, oh, Uncle so-and-so was this way, or Aunt so-and-so was that way, and I feel like I have all these same issues, and maybe we've lived in a completely different context, but we have that organic influence of brain organization on everything that we do, including the contextual influences that affect mental health. There's an entire literature in developmental psychology that looks specifically at people who are able to bounce out of circumstances that would otherwise be crippling to a different person in exactly the same circumstance. And a lot of that we feel is governed by genetic predisposition. There's another point here, which is personal awareness. And we've put theory of mind next to that. A lot of our mental health is influenced by how well we understand what we are thinking. And this is something that's going to come up here over the next hour or so as we walk through some of the questions that we raise around this topic. It implies a certain level of self-talk, which leads to that next point, the third one down, which says ability to express emotions, mental state, and relative balance. Our ability to express in our own brain, put into words or ideas or some level of symbology what it is that we're experiencing inside our head, to understand what our own mental state is, so that we're not just reacting, that we actually can kind of wrap our arms around what's happening to us and maybe even define what it means to us to be in balance, is an important influence on mental health. A big one that I would hope so many of us know a lot about, because it gets talked a lot about, is social connections, coming out of a time when we were experiencing a lot of lockdowns with the pandemic. We understand this and what it means to be deprived from a lot of social connections and how it affects our mental health. But it also means that we have to be practicing good mental health habits. And that can be done in a social context, best when it's in a social context, but it's also a place to learn. So when I say practice, it's not just the practice of self-talk or what have you, but it is practicing with people over and over again and getting better at it lifelong. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there because that just sets up a lot of our conversation, and hand it over to Melanie to continue on with this.
Right. And I think it's so important, why we really felt like we needed to have this discussion is, research shows us that people with physical disabilities who also have severe speech disorders are 2 to 6 times more likely to suffer physical, mental, and sexual abuse. And I think this is the important part of that. The reason that they have that higher rate is because of the result of their inability to communicate effectively. And so this is a very big topic for our AAC users. And so because of that, sometimes that inability to communicate effectively, we also see that they have less access to mental health services. Maybe because they don't have the ways to communicate about it, so they're getting underdiagnosed, but also maybe they are having issues. Maybe people are looking at their behavior and they're also getting maybe misdiagnosed as well, and so they're not having the opportunities to access that mental health services. If we think about how mental health services are accessed, usually we have to go through some time of evaluation that includes speaking to be assessed for that. And if we don't have the words and the vocabulary around mental health, it's very difficult to be able to access it and access those services. And something that we'll talk about a little bit as well is some of those mental health professionals also don't necessarily know how to work with AAC users. And, we need to kind of look at how can we help, something to kind of consider for long term. How do we help that, and how do we change that? We also look at that they have AAC users often have less opportunity or practice talking about mental health, whether that's because there's gatekeeping around getting devices or around words and phrases around mental health and advocacy, or we don't encourage AAC users to talk about their mental health. So a couple different reasons. And then we also know that there is more exposure. AAC users face more exposure to factors that contribute to mental health challenges. And there's a really great article, and we have references at the end that look at what these risk factors are. And it's a really great article by Watson, Raghavendra, and Crocker. And they talk about all of these different risk factors in mental health and how important it is to really address some of these things. And some of the different risk factors that they talk about, I'm just going to kind of really quickly touch on all of these. The experience of discrimination and stigma, they're facing ableism, they're facing discrimination because of their diagnoses. Also that they have concomitant physical health concerns, sometimes with that. So those are also risk factors for higher risk, higher likelihood of having mental health challenges. Difficulties starting and maintaining relationships. A lot of times AAC users, trying to figure out how to maintain those relationships that are outside of their family or their caregivers, and being able to start those and maintain those, it can be a lot more challenging. And then also difficulty engaging in education and employment opportunities. We know that that is a very large challenge. I was just at a conference this past weekend where they were talking about AAC users. How many of you have jobs that are able to sustain, you're able to live off that, that pay? And there were so few that had that. And so looking for ways that we can have that employment or education experiences. And then also lack of trusted and skilled communication partners, exposure to trauma and abuse, reduced self-determination. So when they have opinions and feelings, and are they given choices? Are their choices and their feelings respected and listened to? And when all of these other things aren't happening, there's more likelihood for that loneliness and not having those social connections, so that loneliness. And then also that difficulty establishing regulation strategies. So if we don't, if AAC users don't know how they can regulate, don't know ways that they can access those mental health things that maybe some of us do automatically or we have more access to, you know, that they're higher risk for mental health challenges. So that seems very depressing, that there's all these risk factors, there's all this negativity, but we want to kind of talk about some of the positive other things, protective factors, and I'm going to turn that over to Alicia.
Yeah, and as we kind of keep going with our conversation, we'll frame some of this around these protective factors and what we can do to help with all of the risk factors that are stacked up against AAC users. So looking at things like active participation in diverse communities, how we can help support that, how we can help advocate for that, self-determination. So starting early on, teaching agency, teaching choice making, teaching that control and honoring that control over one's own life, forming meaningful relationships and maintaining them too. And all of that comes down to keeping communication and vocabulary that we can use in those relationships available and accessible. And then, as we just talked about a little bit ago, access to employment. So not just having employment, but having sustainable employment, having employment that one can live off of. And just circling back again, and all of these protective factors, keeping communication as a central focus on these, making sure that we have vocabulary and language to utilize in these factors, to utilize in all of the situations and support we're setting up for AAC users.
So what we did is we came up as a group with some different questions that kind of talk about what do we do? We have all this information, what do we do with that? And so we're going to kind of go through, we have 5 different questions, and we're going to have us kind of start the discussion around it, but we would love to hear any feedback that you have as well during this. So if there are things that you want to add to that, again, feel free to pop things into the chat if you have any other additional ideas as well. So the first question that we had was, what strategies can we identify to help young people using AAC learn about mental health? Alicia, do you want to take this first little part?
Yes, I'll start out with this one. So what I really like about this question is starting off young and just kind of highlighting that all of these things are so important to start from an early age to teach kind of that importance early on and good habits to get into and to start with. So one strategy we can look at that's important to start out with for kind of our understanding of things that contribute to general mental healthiness, and also in relation to those risk and protective factors we've talked about, are supporting things like self-advocacy. How do I talk about myself? How do I communicate about the things I need, the things I want, the things I like, the things I don't like? and supporting that from a young age for AAC users. I talked about self-determination a little bit ago, and we'll probably talk about it again, as these things are just so crucial in that mental healthiness journey, and keeping mental well-being at the forefront for an AAC user. So working on communicating about decisions, making decisions, and how do I make decisions, and that support for that self-determination. And then also working on positive self-image and teaching that positive self-image, really building up all of the wonderful strengths that our AAC users have, building up their image of themselves as we help support them through their journey into this world, their journey in communication, and all of the other wonderful things that they'll do in their lives.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention on that, especially with that self-determination, is I agree so much that we need to teach the AAC users that they can make choices, but then I think that we also need to do more training around the support people around them, that we need to respect those choices, that it may not always be that they're choosing the things that we think that they should choose, and that we need to respect that and encourage them to voice their opinions, even if it's, I don't want that, or I don't like that. So I really love that self-determination and discussing that. I think that's a great one. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Alicia.
It was the other Alicia. It's Chris. I was just going to throw in here that, we know with language learning and other kind of cognitively demanding patterned style learning activities as human beings, okay? We know that explicit teaching far outweighs in terms of getting, like pumping that into a child's brain to where they can make sense of it. Part of it is just exposing them to a world that is mentally healthful, okay? That's maybe best case scenario. But in that, one of the ways that we've all learned about maintaining our mental health is through direct teaching of it. And so I think when we look at strategies that we can identify to help young people using AAC learn about mental health, we have to talk about mental health and not ignore it or assume that it's going to happen as long as they're happy. So part of this is making sure that we provide really concrete teaching opportunities to let them know what's going on so that they can then put that into their head too.
And along with that, really talking about that there's a range of human emotions, positive and negative, and providing that safe and supportive environment for them to express all of those different emotions. And maybe if they don't necessarily know those words for them yet, can we, help? I'm wondering if maybe you're feeling this, or maybe you're feeling this, so then we can help them start to identify in themselves what they're feeling too. Yeah.
Yeah, and a great comment in the chat, ensuring all AAC users have access to all levels of language. I'm mad, I don't like that, I'm scared, I'm mad at you. And all those things are often missed because communication partners are afraid to hear it. And I think all of that is a really great call out to that our AAC users are their own individual persons. Yes. And people. And so teaching early on that they are a person outside of their caregiver, outside of their support workers. And if we can start to allow ourselves to hear these things and to support our users in saying things that we don't always want to hear, that will just help build up that personhood, that individuality and personality for an AAC user.
Absolutely. Okay, so I'm going to move on to our next question, unless there's any other comments on this one. Okay. So we've kind of talked about this a little bit, but how do we provide AAC users practice using these strategies to have good mental health? And I know we've talked a little bit about saying no, declining activities. We've talked about modeling feeling vocabulary. And also providing support and meaning to the feelings that we have in our bodies, because maybe there's, my heart's beating fast or I feel hot, that this might indicate a feeling but maybe I don't have those feeling words, or I can't connect to those feeling words, but maybe there's another way I can talk about how I'm feeling. You know, when I cry, I might be feeling sad or overwhelmed or angry, any of those kind of things. And then also, I think, Chris, you were talking about this a little bit, that self-talk, and you know, having that access to that, because we all, you know, these are some strategies to practice that self-talk. Like, I'm doing okay. I'm going to make it through this. You know, how important it is that we have opportunities to practice that self-talk. I remember we heard from a clinician that she had, it was an older client, but I think it really shows the need to practice that self-talk is, you know, it was a client that had significant issues with breathing. They got into a situation where they were having respiratory distress. And so in the meantime, you know, their carers were calling the nurse to get some help for the client. But that AAC user then went in and started kind of just talking to himself, saying, I'm okay. I'm okay. And I think that that's so powerful that, you know, we all, you know, a lot of times all of us use that self-talk to get us through those difficult, and to self-regulate, and to learn how to do that. I just think that can be a really powerful strategy as well.
So part of what underwrites that is that a person understands what it feels like to be emotional. And you gave examples earlier, Melanie, already about that heart beating, and when we are around someone whose body maybe isn't always capable of expressing itself the way we would expect, or, you know, a little kid might jump up and down angry, or you know, kick something or pound the sand, so to speak. Well, maybe a person that we're with, their body doesn't work that way. So there's some other way that we have to help them understand, well, when I'm doing this, this is what that means. Or when I'm feeling this way, my body does this thing. And that becomes a cue to learn a strategy, not to ignore that, but to understand what's happening, because ultimately we want to be able to talk about it. And again, we're talking about kids here because it's not like kids are it's not like mental health is only going to start and fade during childhood. We want to set a person up for having a very healthy mental life all the way through their lifespan. So
right. And you know, as you say that, Chris, you know, as we get teenagers moving into adulthood, also maybe changing their vocabulary and adding in swear words, adding in adult phrases that they can then use to either have great communication, to, you know, express their frustration in other ways that are more in tune with their age as well. So, you know, kind of looking at some options for that as well. In our chat, we have someone says, encouraging intonation and vocalizations to add more meaning and emphasis to their message. And I agree. I think that finding more ways to add that, Chris, like kind of what you're talking about, adding that personality, adding, you know, when our bodies don't necessarily move or function in the way that maybe we would want to, how can we find the way to express those things through intonation or other ways? And someone else mentioned these self-expression points are part of the Communication Bill of Rights, and you're absolutely right. And then Jill commented, vocal chat options for this are thumbs up. And thanks so much, Jill. Yeah, we'll be talking about some.
Yeah, we'll give a few examples of that here in just a few minutes.
Yeah. Okay. So our next question, if an AAC user lacks practice in talking about mental health, what signs can support teams be looking for to identify AAC users who may have mental health needs? This is you and I.
One of the ways, well, I was just going to say, one of the classic ways that we want to be looking for this is really changes in behavior, changes in the basic behaviors that we've learned for that individual. But there are others that just show us social avoidance, participation avoidance, body posture, and lack of cooperation. These are all aspects of human behavior that are going to give us clues that mental health is suffering. And signs of depression that I think we easily recognize: refusing to use a device. Thanks, Trinity, that's absolutely true. But as obvious as these sound for this specific question, we felt it was important to have this here because we don't always apply the same rules to everyone we're working with. And we feel that this is one of those prime areas where we aren't always as willing. Part of this is our gatekeeping mentality that we sometimes unwittingly wear, where we don't want the person we're working with to feel bad, so we don't accept the fact that they're doing what they're doing as an expression of loneliness, displeasure. Maybe they kind of don't really like what we're doing with them. We don't really want to hear that because we have goals as a clinician. And by gosh, we're going to get through our goals, and these are the 3 activities I already had planned out. And so we are going to play basketball with this crumpled piece of paper in the garbage can, whether you want to or not. But I mean, so it's that kind of thing, and that's a small example, but we have to watch out for all the basic signs for mental health that we would with anyone, really.
Right, and within that too, we're talking about looking at those changes in behavior. Of course, we also need to kind of go through almost like a checklist in our mind. It could identify mental health needs. It could also be, is there, some type of sickness, illness going on that maybe is causing this change? Is there, something else going on in their body or something? Maybe they're uncomfortable. Maybe they're not feeling as well. Maybe they didn't get great sleep last night. That could also be affecting their behavior. But kind of going through that checklist, and there's a great checklist out there, and I wish I could find it, and I will look for it again. But just talking about, here's some of the things to think about. But if not, then yeah, we absolutely need to consider the mental health needs of person if there are those changes in behavior. Absolutely.
The last thing I would mention is in one of the references that we'll share at the end of this is this recognition that Melanie brought up earlier, that people who use AAC are massively more at risk for mental health issues that relate specifically to abuse, psychological abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, etc. And so it's also beholden on us, because we know that, to be especially aware of signs that a person might be going through that, just because we know already that they're going to be at higher risk for it. So we just want to have our antenna up and aware.
And Caroline noted that she sees in anxiety-related communication, like repeatedly asking or expressing what's next, or wanting to control what's next. And absolutely, I could definitely see that as a sign that something might be going on, those mental health needs. Okay. So the next question is, how can support teams advocate for AAC users who have mental health needs?
And Ashley, you're on mute, just so you know. Yep. It's okay. Happens to me every day.
My name is Ashley Mohesky, and I am a full-time AAC user as well as a licensed professional counselor associate under supervision in Texas. When we're supporting AAC users and noticing that they are struggling with mental health, it's important to not only pay attention to their nonverbal language, but also what they're actually telling you. Although we may work with these individuals on a regular basis, we can still fall into the belief that AAC users don't struggle with mental health just by the fact that they can't verbally speak, and that's simply not the case. Also, if someone is having a hard time, I would encourage you not to use toxic positivity, which is basically glossing over one's problem by using too much positivity, and that is just not helpful when someone is really struggling. If you are trying to seek professional help for an individual, ask them how accessible their services are and how inclusive they are. Ask them if they have ever worked with an AAC user, and if they have, what did they take away from the experience? Many therapists offer free consultations to see if they would be a good fit for the client, and they are mainly over the phone. But in these cases, it might be best to do a video call so that the user can feel included. Of course, if the individual can contact the therapist themselves, you wouldn't need to do these suggestions. But if they couldn't, I hope these tips help you to support a user who was struggling.
I think those are so great. And I like the call out about bringing in video calls and just finding other ways to access mental health for the AAC user, especially when they may not have the independence to make those phone calls themselves, and that we need to make sure these things are happening. I really appreciate the point about toxic positivity, and that, yeah, it's not everything needs to be positive all the time. And it's really important that we advocate as professionals to listen to the things that AAC users are saying, and that it's okay and appreciated when something is going on that's not always positive, when something's wrong, or when they have a problem, or when they need to tell us about something that might not be a comfortable topic. And there's so many great comments in the chat too, including engaging social workers in the conversation, to engage with our students in small groups in schools. I think there's some great opportunity for collaborations there with SLPs, teachers, and social workers, kind of bringing that mental health piece into a group, and bringing that language piece and AAC and access all together, and really using all of the skills, all of the knowledge that we all have to work together to make mental health, mental wellness a commonplace practice. We're really working on that, I think, collectively as a society, but we know that our AAC users are often kind of trailing behind all of that. So bringing that into focus for our AAC users too. Also really teaching literacy skills so the user can write out exactly what they are feeling and not what they need specifically. Literacy is our gateway into so much communication, into infinite things that we can say. And it does just really call out that importance to literacy from an early age. And it's all of these things that we always talk about all come together, because we can't really do mental health without all of the other skills that we're teaching for AAC, including literacy.
I have a quick question for Ashley about this also, which is everything that you've both just talked about is so true. And I think my question though is, if let's just say we're a support team and we are attempting to, and we've identified someone who we feel is at risk. They have indicated that they're willing to talk to someone. So my question, Ashley, is, as a person who does not use your natural speech, what would you want? How comfortable would you be working with someone who is using their natural speech, who may not have any awareness of AAC, but here you are as a person using AAC who may have mental health needs related to the fact that you are using AAC? So it's sort of, I guess my question is, would you be willing to talk to that person, or would you want them to have certain skills identified before you engaged with them?
In counseling, we are drilled. 2. Really. Listen. 2. Clients and I. Don't. Just. Mean. Verbally. Verbally. We. Also. Have. To. Look. At. Nonverbal. Communication. So. If. A. Therapist. Has. Lose. Scales. I. Would. Be. Open. To. Talking. To. A. Therapist. Who. Uses. Natural. Speech. In counseling, we are drilled to really listen to clients, and I don't just mean verbally. We also have to look at nonverbal communication, so if a therapist has those skills, I would be open to talking to a therapist who uses natural speech.
So it's really about the human connection, which is perfect. And that's how we get to an equitable environment in the end anyway. Okay, thank you for your thoughts on that.
And Caroline also mentioned in here, and I think it's just a really great point, is looking at strategies more than talk therapy, looking at visuals and other ways that we can assist AAC users that doesn't require talk therapy. I think that's a really great call out. Okay, so our next question, how can mental health practitioners learn how to work with AAC users? So that kind of a nice segue, Chris, into that question.
Ashley, you want to start?
Counseling graduate programs don't specifically teach students how to work with this population, so when they encounter a potential client who uses AAC, it's highly likely that they're not going to know how to work with the client. One of the most important aspects when working with this population is to always presume competence, no matter their level of cognitive function. If you automatically assume that they are not going to benefit from therapy just because they can't verbally communicate, therapy isn't going to work. This kind of goes along with what I was saying about presuming competence. but always check your biases at the door. If you always have distorted beliefs about the AAC community, realize where the biases are coming from and work through them. It can also be beneficial to do some research on AAC in general to get a better understanding of what this population can do and how AAC can be extremely helpful. As far as therapeutic interventions, the best thing you can do is join the client's world, even if it doesn't look typical. When therapists work with children, they will use play therapy to help the child navigate their emotions, because they might not have the skills to communicate how they are feeling. For AAC users, joining their world can look like playing a game with them on their device, if possible. I know that some people like to create art with their device, so you could use art as a therapeutic activity. Personally, I am able to participate in traditional talk therapy, so I wouldn't need a therapist to get creative with their techniques, but there are some individuals who may require more creativity. It's going to come down to the individual client and what works best for them. Lastly, and I cannot stress this enough, be patient with clients who use AAC as they are composing a message.
Yeah. Yeah, that's brilliant. My favorite part of your answer is checking biases at the door, because even those of us that glowingly purport to not have any, of course we do. And I guess it just can't be said enough, nor can it be said loudly enough over and over again to do that. And I guess the real challenge is for those of us who, and I think this is the AAC, all AAC stakeholders are advocates on some level, whether we are self-advocates fighting for the definition of our own personhood, like Alicia was talking about earlier, or we're advocates because we're standing on the steps of our state capitol, or we're advocates because we're agreeing to be part of a conference and stand up in front of people and talk about something that's important, or have a coffee table conversation with people about what drives us to go to work every day. We've got to somehow make sure that we're broadcasting this in a way that AAC is normalized in the way that you're talking about, Ashley, which is that it's that person-to-person communication. There is no bias. We're presuming competence. There's a utilization of different symbols, but that's it. We're still having to connect on some level. And if that means playing with a train or making art, or if it means waiting while someone composes a message, it's kind of all the same thing in the end. But it does take practice. It does take practice, and it doesn't come as naturally to everyone as maybe those of us who've had a lot of practice. So yeah, so it means continuing to shout about what we do to make sure that people understand that mental health is out there as a thing, and that the resources that can be brought to bear are very meaningfully and should never be avoided. Okay,
And
now.
Really quick, Claire,
Yes.
Claire mentioned that there's a group, SLTs plus psychologists are looking at developing an online mindfulness group for our service adults with CP, including individuals using AAC.
Brilliant.
That's amazing.
That's awesome. Yeah. So we should. So how are we all going to find out? I guess we could just search for that. Claire, if you want to post where we could find resources about that, that would be excellent.
Yes.
But if not, we understand, and we'll just start lurking around the internet and try to find it. Okay. If you want to start talking a little bit about some of the supports in AAC platforms, and we'll work through this topic a little bit.
Due to the inability to communicate verbally, it can often feel isolating, which can lead to mental health struggles. One of the great things about Grid is accessible apps such as texting, social media, and email. By using these apps, It leads to higher levels of engagement with the world around us. People have to form relationships with each other in order to live fulfilling lives, and this includes the AAC community. If there's one thing that 2020 taught us is how we are not meant to live in isolation, so the more connections we have, the better. I will provide the caveat that too much social media exposure can cause a decline in mental health, so it's important to monitor social media usage as well as mental health. Also, in the Voco chat grid, there is a place where users can use the visual scale to rate their mental health from 1 to 10. Since the scale is used in the medical field, it is likely that children and adults have familiarity with it and can see that it is also helpful in getting treatment for their mental health.
Absolutely. So having access to communication in general can be hugely supportive for people. And we're going to talk in about 2 minutes about some really concrete vocabulary that can help as well. But I'll just top off what you were just talking about, Ashley, by mentioning that phone access is one of those things, and phone and texting. I'm going to loop these two. You already mentioned texting, but phone and texting, because what is it that we do, or I should say, what is it that I do oftentimes when I'm recognizing that I'm either feeling a certain way, or I need to take a little break, or the work's gotten to me, or something has just happened where mentally I'm not as balanced as I want to be in that moment. One of the first things I frequently do is I pick up the phone and I call somebody, or I text a friend and make that quick connection with somebody, just to kind of remember, oh, there's somebody else out there that I know and love who's going to talk back to me, or talk me through this, or reflect on the way I'm feeling and tell me that's kind of dumb, why are you doing that, or validate how I feel, or whatever. So having access to that as an AAC user is vital for a lot of people. So we're going to transition into some examples within a language system within Grid next, because it's a really good concrete way to show how much vocabulary matters in providing access to the ability to talk about how we feel, both expressively and by making it available, having it be there to help us learn about how to talk about our mental status. So we're using Grid as the example here, and we're going to start out with specifically VocoChat, because it was really the first time, this vocabulary is infused in a lot of our strategies now, but VocoChat was the first one where we made a real concerted effort to make sure that vocabulary around mental health was just baked into the language strategy. So I'm going to hand it over to my dear colleagues, Alicia and Melanie, to discuss this.
Oh, yep.
There we go.
We're looking at VocoChat, which is just a brief overview, a pragmatically organized language system that allows users to build their messages with message chunks, really supporting getting to the meaning and the root of your message efficiently. So for the sake of time, we're going to highlight a few things. So there's this something is wrong message pathway that will jump into a lot of reasons of what might be wrong. It could be with your body. It could be about a feeling. It could be something that you don't want to do. It could be that you have an opinion about something. Maybe something happened. Maybe there's something wrong with your device or talking. So just gives a lot of really nice ways to talk about what might be wrong. And then, yeah, if we want to jump back home, and we'll dive into this My Toolkit a little bit. I want to just highlight what's in here. A lot of this vocabulary can be accessed in multiple ways throughout VocoChat. But you'll see talking to myself. So we talked about earlier some of that self-talk.
I'm talking to myself.
A lot of vocabulary that you can use for that self-talk, for that inner voice, room to add things and to customize things as one would like. You'll see there's calming down strategies in there. So just ways to advocate for things that things a user might need when they need to just have a minute, and what tools might be helpful. And this can be both used from a user, but then also help the communication partner have some ideas into what might be helpful.
Alicia, I was in a classroom a couple of weeks ago, and there was a situation where there are some folks who use AAC in the classroom. There's a bunch of kids that don't. And this was one of those, Ashley, you probably would have had a lot to say in this circumstance, but the teacher and others were all helping. It got a little bit nutty because it was one of the first days here in the Pacific Northwest. It wasn't raining after a very long winter. And so the kids were all crazy. They wanted to go outside, and they were supposed to sit, and then they were supposed to get all their desks cleaned up and then line up and then go out. And a couple of kids had just sort of lost it. They were so excited to go. And there was all this talk around managing the emotions of these children, but none of the people using AAC were part of that discussion. And so when we look at, if you can click calming down again, since you're there,
Calming down.
Wouldn't it be powerful if instead there was vocabulary available for the people using AAC to participate in that entire discussion? And so they weren't just, if they were kind of having a moment, instead of just getting dragged off somewhere, they had the ability to learn about what it means to hug yourself, or request listening to music, or I just want to go to my safe place. I just want to go to my safe place. And or take deep breaths. And this gives that chance to both model what that means, as well as let that person express themselves. And Alicia, you mentioned self-determination at the very beginning of this discussion, and that's what it's all about. So sorry, I just want to inject that little anecdote because it was so relevant.
Yeah, absolutely. Then we'll let's check out this I'm not okay, and then we can kind of
I'm not okay.
see where we're at for time. So we looked at this a little bit earlier. We saw something similar in the something's wrong, but it has this nice place that says it feels like. And I like the
it feels like
because it gives the vocabulary to talk about what your body feels like. So maybe you don't have the word to go with an emotion, or you're working on that vocabulary, or you just can't quite name it, but you know that, I feel like I want to cry. And so that just gives a lot of really powerful information, that it doesn't just have to be those feelings words, those emotions words that we use to talk about our mental health. It can be about what our body feels like, and just provides access to all levels of people in their language journey on communicating about their feelings, whether physical, whether a feeling, an emotion, just lots of good vocabulary here. And then you can see lots of other things that might be wrong. I like this right side gives, I'm lonely, I miss something, I don't want to talk about it. I think it's really important to have these things that it's important to be able to talk about things, but it's also really important for me to say, I don't want to talk about it right now, or maybe I don't want to talk about it with you. And those are so important in that self-advocacy and that determination, and just creating that individualism and honoring an AAC user as their own person.
I'm just
something happened.
Gonna really quick also point out the something happened as well. This is the teen and adult version, so it has had a breakup. In the child version, it looks a little different, but also having words around someone touched me, being able to talk about sexual abuse, or talking about someone called me name, that there's verbal abuse or other things going on, that users have ways to advocate for themselves around those difficult topics, and that they can learn where those are. So just wanted to point that out.
Awesome.
And Ashley had also pointed out, are you going to talk about? Okay, I'll let you go.
I'll read it.
You read my mind. No, I was going to point out, and you'll see those rating scales that Ashley was talking about earlier, with the familiar 1 through 5, with the familiar smiley faces and frown faces that are already infused into medical practices. And then at the bottom, we'll allow you to rate your feelings too, from sadness to, I think, excited or very happy. So just again, a variety of different ways to access communication about how you feel.
Mm-hmm. I just want to show another thing, it's like one of my favorites. We would be remiss if we didn't talk about Smoji just briefly. These are built in to a lot of our grid sets. And again, having some just quick ways to show emotion, you know, and have bad things that we're feeling sad, or, you know, we're just exhausted, or we're feeling hot, or we're really, really, really mad and we want to talk about it. And so having the ways to express all of those different things, it's just another way to kind of, again, show that personality, get a little bit deeper, show the intonation in a way, without necessarily having intonation in words. Okay. Are we going to move on, I think?
We should, just so that we let people know that we can round out this discussion, because we're at the end of our hour. And I think that we won't talk through all these things, but it's important for us to at least mention them so that we can also get to where we're letting you see the references we mentioned earlier. We're missing a lot. What we've talked about today is so foundational in so many ways. And when Ashley and Alicia and Melanie and I met, and we were kind of mixing it up, talking about this topic and how we felt like it would be a good way to present it. We actually are not yet sophisticated enough in the world of AAC to have a high-level discussion about mental health, because we've ignored it for 40 or 50 years. And so it's time that we get busy being more sophisticated. And I'm proud of what we've done with VocoChat as an example of getting vocabulary in there, but it's barely scratching the surface. There's so much more that we need to be talking about. Ashley is an author on a paper that's referenced here below that deals with specifically what it would mean to be in a counseling environment with someone who uses AAC as the person doing the counseling, and what that means to people who are sitting there as the person seeking help. It's fascinating. That is a much more sophisticated discussion than we're actually even prepared for in our industry, because we just have that much to do.
Well, I think it shows, Chris, that we need more research around mental health and AAC. There's just a dearth of that right now. And so excited that Ashley's doing that type of research, but just how much more really is needed.
Yeah, I don't know, Ashley, is there anything you wanted to add to that? No? Okay. It's a great article. It's really worth finding. Is there anything before we close out that we need to say other than thanks for being here? I think we're very open to continuing this discussion. We're all four of us are very committed to it. And I mean, Ashley's committed to it professionally. We're committed to it as advocates, and we look forward to hearing all the different ways that we can continue this conversation far beyond what we've covered today. And like I say, in much more sophisticated ways and with more depth.
And someone just asked me to put the link in the chat, and I will attempt to do that. I might have to get out. I'm going to stop sharing in order to do that. So just give me a second here, and I will work on that. And I think, as far as I know, if I remember correctly, and you all can confirm or deny that we're going to be posting our slides as well as the link for this webinar. It will be shared within the next few days.
And as participants, we should be able to just blast that out to you. So we'll get on that.
Well, thank you all for joining us. Yes.
Yeah, for those of you for whom it's later in the evening, have a wonderful rest of your evening. For those of us just ending our day soon, I hope that that's great for you all as well. And I look forward to being in touch with all of you in the future. Thanks again.